After learning that this DC Multiverse line existed, my curiosity got the better of me. I remember going on Amazon, doing a quick search for DC Multiverse Mcfarlane just to see what figures were available at this point in time. And when I saw this version of Azrael in action figure form, I was quite surprised. I didn't realize this figure existed, and this version of Azrael is from Batman Curse of the White Knight, which is a sequel to Batman the White Knight. And if you saw my review on the White Knight Batman figure, I did say in that video that I read the Batman White Knight comic. And I've really loved Sean Gordon Murphy's take on the Batman mythos in that particular comic. There's just something to how he wrote the characters and even how he drew the characters. And I never got a chance to read the sequel because around this point in time, I was so busy with schoolwork that I just didn't want to read anything because the schoolwork that I was dealing with already requires you to read so much that my mind was just like, you know what? When we're on break, all we're doing is playing video games and watching YouTube. We're not going to read anything. So there were mangas and comic books that I had for a while that were just stackpiled, and I never bothered to read them. Now, of course, in recent years, I finally got to finish some of those things that were on my to-read list, but I never got to The Curse of the White Knight. So, I need to get on that. Okay? I need to read that comic, all right? So, this is one of those instances where I bought this figure because, hey, I love seeing Sean Gordon Murphy's art style in action figure form, and since Mcfarlane was able to do a good job with that White Knight Batman figure, I figured they probably did a good job with this Azrael figure. And it turns out they did, because this figure really looks like it walked out of the comic book pages. So, even though I didn't read the story, I do have a hunch of what this sequel is about. I'm pretty sure this is Sean Gordon Murphy's take on the Batman versus Azrael storyline. And the data profile card will probably give us that information. So, with that said, let's get on to the review of this figure. And of course, as usual, let's start off with the data profile card. And as you can see, there is this nice image of what the figure looks like in the comic book source material. And I'm hoping that I can make the thumbnail of today's video look similar to this. I hope I can. I'll try, because I really like this image of how the sword is on fire and everything. It's crazy looking. And of course, down here it says Batman Curse of the White Knight. And on the back, you do have, that information stuff again, which is crazy to see on these older cards. It does say the source material, and it's from issue number 1 of Curse of the White Knight. And the comic came out in 2019. And his real name is Jean Paul Valley. Of course, we know who that is if you read the Nightfall comics. And, of course, it says his height is 6'4", and his weight is 250 pounds. Interesting. And it reads right here, War veteran, Knight of the Order of St. Dumas, and now the Joker's key recruit in the crusade against Batman, Azrael is the Dark Knight's most powerful new threat, and the one living link to a devastating secret about the Wayne family's legacy in Gotham City. Wow, that's actually interesting. So, he's here because it's like a moment from the past. It's like the past is like coming back for you, that's kind of what that sounds like. And it's linked to his family legacy and stuff. Whoa. Okay, now that makes me want to read the story. What the heck? Why have I not read this? Okay, there's that. There's the data profile card. And he does come with, of course, an accessory. 2 accessories. I will call it 2 because they can separate. He does come with his sword. Of course, Azrael's main weapon is a sword. And in the original packaging, the sword was packaged like this with the fire effect on it. And the cool part is the fire effect is removable. I remember when I got this figure a long time ago, I didn't realize you can take that off. And then when I found out it just comes off, I was like, whoa, that is cool. So you can have him holding the sword without the flame effects on and just have it like this. And the sword is pretty nicely detailed. You do have the hilt design here, as you can see, and it's a pretty interesting looking sword. I like the way that it's painted. And usually with swords, you would think that the blade would go all the way down to this part, but in this case, it doesn't. Like, his blade starts from here. So this is like a very long hilt for a sword, I guess. Pretty interesting. And the other good thing about the sword is that it's not using the soft PVC material that they started using later on, where it was prone to warping easily. Like, you can see that this sword is kind of warped, right? Of course, it's still, it can suffer from warpage, but not as easy as those newer swords that came later using that sort of plastic material. So there's that. And he also comes with the fire effect, of course, on the sword. And it's pretty much just translucent plastic painted in orange. But nevertheless, it's cool that he came with this effect piece for a sword. So, I like the fact that it's removable. And I like the fact that this can probably go on some of the other swords if it's the right size. And you don't have to use it for just this version of the sword. So that's cool. All right, let's talk about the aesthetic of this figure. And I don't even know where to begin with this one. Like, there's so much to talk about with this figure. I guess we'll start with the head sculpt. The head sculpt for this figure looks really neat. I like the fact that he has a hoodie on, and you can see the mask that he's wearing, right? Like, it looks really cool. And they try to make this hoodie look like it's part of his costume. And even though it's not like cloth good material, it's pretty nicely sculpted for a hoodie. So there's that. And it is all red up here. There is a sculpting here to make it look like, he's has it on all the way, of course. And I don't know if you noticed this, but doesn't this kind of remind you a little bit of the Arkham Knight design? I don't know why, but like, to me, it kind of looks like the Arkham Knight design of Azrael, just in a different costume, because the Arkham Knight design of this character did have a hoodie on as well, and he did wear, I believe, a mask as well on his face. Not exactly like this kind of mask, but a different kind of mask where you can see his eyes. So, I don't know, it just gives me a little bit of some sort of Arkham Knight vibes. That's what I'm getting from this figure. And now let's talk about the aesthetics. In the paint area, since I'm going to start with that because that's the obvious thing to talk about first. You can see that there is a contrast of red and black in his torso right here. So if you look closely at, like, this part, as I'm trying to speak here. Actually, let me use the sword to point this out. Let me make it easier, actually. So this part of his costume, right? All this cloth stuff right here that's sculpted in with wrinkles. There is this contrast in colors here with the black and the red, like some sort of shading. And I really love the fact that that detail exists. It's pretty freaking nice that they painted it this way. And, this is a $20 figure when this figure came out. So this type of paint detail, it isn't common with $20 figures. That was what kind of blew me away when I saw this figure. I was like, wait a minute. Some $20 figures don't even get this kind of paint scheme going on. Like, they usually get very simple, paint. So to see that they did this with this figure, and it's not just up here, right? Like, it goes all the way down here to his skirt piece, and even in here with certain crevices of where his ab area is, like where the costume continues, you can see, a little bit of that paint as well. Now, of course, that's like a more darker red. But yeah, it's just like a mix in between like light and dark in some areas. And I really like the fact that they painted it that way. And it's not just on the front. It continues on the back too. So, sometimes some companies get really lazy where they just leave the back part flat. But in this case, they didn't do that. They were like, no, let's not do that. Let's continue that paint style on the back as well. So I really like the fact that that is there. And as you can see, this is the back part of his belt. You got the strap there. You got little details there. And speaking of like those tiny little sculpt details of what is on his costume, you can see that there's a cross right here. This is part of his belt, like a strap here. That's an extension of his belt. He also has like a knife that he carries, which unfortunately is not removable. It's very similar to the knife that Batman has on his utility belt. And even if it was removable, he wouldn't even be able to hold it anyways because his hands are too big for this handle. So, they sculpted this knowing that this would stay on the figure at all times. Now, the difference is this top part here doesn't hinder articulation. However, this bottom part does. So, if you spread the legs out, it could probably warp this bottom part of the sheath that's holding the knife. So that's something to be careful with. As for other areas that are nicely sculpted, as I'm trying to speak here, you also have this shoulder armor piece right here. I don't know what to call this. It is shoulder armor, basically, right? And I really like all this detail that they put in here. Now, of course, up here where the paints are, it can get very messy, depending on your copy of the figure. So, that's something that's also present on the other side. Oh, almost dropped the figure. But I really like the shoulder armor here. It's really neat. Now, the problem is, this shoulder armor, even though it's nicely sculpted, it does hinder articulation, as you can tell, for this arm. And then on this arm, there's more freedom. But luckily, since he holds his sword with his right arm, I'm glad this arm doesn't have any restrictions to it, so he can hold the sword and wield it better. So that's one good thing there that they took into account. But yeah, that's pretty much the details going on in these upper areas of the figure. Let's just put it that way. All right, let's talk about the bottom where his legs are. Very simple. It's just all red. His shoes are pretty much simplistic looking as well. There's no details going on down there. It's just all simple paint. So, some areas are lacking details, but of course, you're not really going to be concerned about the legs, right? Like, it's just the legs. As long as the main part of his costume is where all the details are, that's where it shines. And now, speaking of the arm, he does have his arm gauntlets, and they're all painted in gold. And he does have the same red color here that's painted the same way as his legs. So, some areas are not painted like this, but of course, just seeing the contrast of reds on this figure makes it pop, Like, it doesn't have to be the same sort of paint style here throughout the entire figure. And I think that's what I like about this figure too, is the fact that you have this contrast of reds so you can spot the differences, and it really does give it that sort of look to it. Now, the other thing that I want to talk about is, of course, his cape. So, interestingly enough, I don't know if this is called a cape. I don't know what to call this, okay? Like, I don't know what the proper term is, but you see characters have designs like this before. Like, a good example is Mr. Sinister from X-Men. Like, he has something like this going on the back of his outfit, right, that he wears. And it's very interesting. Like, it just might be some design from the 80s or in the 90s where they love doing, like, capes like this. Again, I don't know what to call it. I don't know what the proper term is, but I'm just going to call it a cape, all right? So, I like the fact that that is present on the figure. It does give him that really cool look. And it does kind of look very reminiscent to another design of the Azrael costume. that we've seen before. So let me zoom out here. And, we'll bring them back in for comparison. But, like, these bits up here do remind me of the design of the armor that he has from the Knight's End version. I think that's how you pronounce the name of that comic book. And you can see on his shoulders, he has those 3 things, right, on each shoulder. Now, the difference is that on this one, they look like armor parts that are sharp. But on that version, from the Curse of the White Knight design, it's not exactly like that. So, there's that. Okay. Now that I've got that out of the way, that is basically everything in terms of aesthetics for this figure, I believe. There's really nothing else going on here. It's very nicely detailed, let's just put it that way, for a $20 figure. And yeah. All right, let's talk about articulation. So his head can look up. Not the best, unfortunately. As you can see, it's hindered by the joint underneath, by how this head is sculpted. But if you want him to look down, he can look down. So he can look down pretty good, which is really strange. But he can't look up. So I don't know what happened there. Now, for his arm, this arm does go out. It does go all the way if you just, like, spread it out like that. So it can fully rotate all the way, which is really cool. He does have the single-jointed arm. I was going to say double-jointed. It's single-jointed. And it does have the ratchet function again, just like the White Knight Batman figure. And let me get that fixed. And he also has, swivel in the hand, articulation in the hand. So that's good. He does have swivel up here, and it's hidden with this shoulder piece up here. So that's nice. And this arm is more free. Now, this arm is not the best. Because of the shoulder armor, this side is hindered, so he's not going to really stick his arm out too much or too back. So that's the limitation of the shoulder armor, as you can see there. It does the same thing. It's single jointed, swivel, articulation. So same thing as the right arm. As for his torso, he can't really lean back. Not good at leaning back. He can lean forward if you use the ab area to lean forward. So he can technically do a ab crunch, but it's not the best, as you can see. His upper torso does rotate. I guess okay. Not the best, but he can rock, side to side, so that's good. He does have waist articulation, so that's pretty good as well. But of course, my copy is kind of tight. But it does work. So if you heat it up, it does work. Now let's get to the leg articulation on this figure. So for his legs, he does kick out even with the skirt. He can kick out pretty decently. That's not too bad, actually, even with the skirt. But as you can see, it does push this piece up, right? And speaking of spreading his legs out, now when you spread his legs out, he can actually do a full-on split. That's pretty freaking impressive. But again, it's going to warp this piece up here where the knife is. So that's something you have to be careful with if you have this figure. He does have double jointed legs. There you go. He does have articulation in the feet. They do swivel, and there is toe articulation. So, pretty standard articulation as usual with most Mcfarlane figures. And that's basically it for articulation. So, not too bad, but not the best. All right. There's that. Now, let me put the sword on the figure. I want to show this on camera. Let me see if I can. So what I tend to do is I always try to push this into his hand. And it can be a hassle to put in sometimes. But I should be able to do this. Hopefully without breaking anything, please. Oh no. Come on. Oh, there we go. There we go. All right. We got the hands in. The sword hilt in the hand. And there he is with the sword. Let me see if I can get him to stand. Reposition him a little bit. Okay, there we go. Stand for me, please. All right, there you go. He got a sword on, and he's holding it. So you can have him with the sword like that. Or If you want the sword to be on fire, you can do it by putting that accessory back on, which you just slide into the sword hilt. I mean, not the sword hilt, the sword blade. Man, I'm getting terms mixed up right now. All right, so there's that. Okay, that's cool. All right, let's just leave it there. And now it's time for comparisons. So, who do we want to start with here? All right, let's bring in the White Knight Batman, okay? Let's start with the ones from the story. So, there he is next to the White Knight Batman figure. And as you can see, he towers over him a little bit. He's taller than Batman. So, that's pretty cool right there. You could have them fight each other if you want to pose the two of them together. If you have these two figures and you want to get them into a action scene where they're like fighting each other, you could do that as well. Pretty freaking cool. And I'm very happy to have these two figures in my collection. The only one thing I regret is the fact that I don't have the Joker figure from the White Knight comic. That is one of my biggest regrets. I wish I got that figure back then, and for some reason I did not. So there is that. And here he is with, of course, the later suit that he dons. So just like in the Nightfall comic, he changes his costume. Well, this is what the other costume looks like in the story. And yeah, pretty freaking cool as well. And I might do a review on this one in the future. A whole separate review on this one. So, we'll see. But there it is. Those two designs. And here he is, of course, next to the Walmart exclusive gold label back in the day of the Nightfall Azrael suit. Completely different, as you can see. Very different. And here's a zoom in on that. So, yep. There you go there. And last but not least, of course, the one I brought in earlier. I'm going to have to hold him because he's not going to stand. Wait, actually, let me see if I can get him to stand. I don't want him to fall over. Okay, don't fall over, please. Here he is, of course, with the Knight's End version. Do not fall. And yeah, very different as well. But a very cool character, none the least, Like, I love all these different versions of the costumes that he's worn throughout, like, other depictions of this character. Like, it's just crazy looking. Like, especially the Nightfall and the Knight's End version. Like, those ones are pretty cool. But yeah, I really like this White Knight version too as well. Like, I really like this one having that more, it really does fit the theme of the character, if you get what I mean. If you found this video informative, do give this video a like. If you want to subscribe to the channel for more action figure content and whatever else I do on this channel, you can. You don't have to. In the end of the day, I make these videos for fun. And with that said, take care, and I will see you in the next video.